So moving on to the agenda for today, our first presenter, our first speaker, Colin Parkin, how to use a liability audit. Colin, I can see you on my screen, ready to go.
Yeah, ready to go. Morning, Ed. Morning, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity. So, how to use a liability audit. This first started for me about 16 years ago when I saw a presentation by Helen Jenkins doing a focus session on a company will. And this idea hit immediately to me that I could use this. And Ed's going to share the screen for me. So this was Helen's typical company will. I've never changed it since she used it. And I thought I can expand on this and make it work for me to do large cases with this opportunity of the company will. Now, if this is how a company business wants to look, the best thing is that somebody does something about it. So if we can go on to the next slide, Ed. Can we do the next slide, Ed? So this is the liability audit form that I put together for myself. And lots of people have asked me over the time how we use this and how we put it together. Well, I use a number of question techniques to get the information that I require. And whether it be that someone is a sole trader, working in a partnership, or a limited company, or an SME, it doesn't really matter. You can ask the questions you want. And one of the first questions I ask is, which sector do you work in? Do you work in the public sector, the private sector? Do you do some of both? Are you UK only? Do you work internationally? And following on from that, if you work internationally, do you export? Do you import? Or do you do both? And then moving on from there, what new markets would you like to develop? And if so, how are you going to do these? Do you have an exit plan? And if you do, what is it? And what are the tax implications of this? Now, these are the four main questions I use with firms, and it gets an awful lot of information out. Now, if you're working with a company and you want to have some information, then the first thing I do when I'm doing my research is to look on the Companies House website and get the overview, filing information, the history of the people, their shareholdings, their charges. So I've got as much information about the people involved in that company that I can. And what you will normally find in a lot of these companies, there will be an imbalance in the shareholding. And that will mean that the controlling interest is probably 51% or more with one person, or certainly a large shareholding. So if you've got this situation and something happens to that person, then there is an immediate problem for that company. How do they solve that? So what I try and do with the life companies that I use, most of them have large case teams. So if you talk to the large case teams and find out what the limits are on the life cover you can do, and one that I was doing recently, one of the shareholders held 6.5 million shares, and the other shares were split between the other shareholders in around about 1 million and 1.5 million each. So if that key shareholder had gone, then it would have been really difficult. And the problem was that he was an insulin dependent diabetic. So it was a matter of finding a company that would give the best terms for an insulin dependent diabetic. And the way that that works is that speaking to the team, find out what the medical issues are so you know which company to go to. And then when you've got that information, look at how you're going to break that down. And are you going to discount commission back? Are you going to take it on a monthly basis? Are you going to have it on a fixed rate? Are you going to do a fixed fee? Get all of the information prepared that you need so you know how that works. So this is doing your research before you start. And the best way of doing that is to have it on a no clawback basis. And we always used to take the commission monthly, so that way, if something did go wrong with the company, it was never a great issue. Now, one of the biggest problems that we've all faced this year is the pandemic. And we know that an awful lot of companies have failed. And especially if you've been in the retail sector, how would you have coped with all of the stuff that's going on? And if you've got no plan in place, and I'm sure that we all know people who've suffered from the COVID epidemic, and we've maybe lost clients. Now, personally, over the last year, I've lost 7 clients to COVID, of which 5 of them had systems in place that I'd put in place years ago. So I'm pleased that I've been able to sort that out. Now, if we can go on to the brochure slide, Ed, if that's possible.
You got it.
Yeah, so this is my business succession program that I use with my clients. And if we go through page by page, Ed, you'll see that on the first page, the numbers start at 3. Now, this was deliberate because when I send this out to people, it's one of the questions that people ask. Well, what's happened to 1 and 2? Well, 1 and 2 isn't in place. So we haven't decided whether there is something we can work with your company on. And if so, can we put that in place? So the first one would be, can we do a liability audit? And the second one would be, can we present it to your business? So moving on to the next page, Ed. So could your business be more successful and more secure? So it's highly rewarding for you and your co-directors and partners when things go well. But when things go badly, you need to have things in place. So let's look at the potential problems that there may be. And again, this is going through your question technique to ask what people do. So protecting the future of your business. The partners and directors of a business are its driving force and the reasons for its success. What would happen if one is no longer there? And if the shares end up in the hands of someone else, how are you going to work? It could be the wife, the husband who's the widower, and you just don't know whether you're going to be able to work with that person. And I know from personal experience that it's not easy when you've got a crazy woman on the other side of a partnership. So it's definitely important to have something in place. So moving on to the next slide. So the remaining partners and directors, how do they find the money to buy out the partner's share? How do they continue paying income to the family until that share is paid off? Perhaps they're already reduced profits. Learn to accept that it's never going to work well for everybody, so there's got to be a plan in place. Or you may have to consider winding up the business, and then the first company will that I showed you will actually take place. And the predators that'll be around the corner from the competitions will want to take advantage of everything that goes through. So we've seen it from the survivor's point of view, but what if you died? Where does your family stand in all of this? They've inherited your share of the business. They're unlikely to be able to take over your role. Do they have the skills and knowledge and experience? And would the remaining partners be prepared to accept them? So protecting the future of your family is also important. Your family's options. This may not amount to much if the business is struggling because of your absence, and how long your partners will agree to this. Receive a share of its value, but if the real value is foreign, they could be little or nothing. So this relies on finding a buyer who's prepared to pay the right price. And this can be a long and difficult process. And you've only got to look at places like Debenhams. All of those big stores that they had across the high street are now going to stand empty for years and years and years as everything moves online. Excuse me. So your family's options. So the answer to the business succession program is to have a pre-planned legal framework which ensures the success of the business and protection of the families. So the ample business succession plan combines new agreements, life insurance, and a series of trusts. And I'm sure I don't need to explain to everybody how to do those. We have lawyers who put the trusts and everything together for us. That generates work for them. So they're quite happy to receive that work, and it also refers recommendations back to us. So putting this plan together, so this was Helen Jenkins' first idea with the company will. It got me to top of the table, and over the years I've developed it and developed it even further. So we've even gone to looking at how we do extra things for clients in terms of how they look at sort of special projects. So if you're wanting to develop a company, what kind of things can you do more moving forward? Now, I do quite a lot of work in the EU market, or I did before I sold the practice. But in the UK now, there is an organisation called Supply to Gov, and it's very easy to register for. There is a monthly cost if you want to receive the information. But if you wanted to go UK and Ireland, the cost is £95 a month. If you just wanted to go England only, it's £45 a month. And if you wanted to go just specifically in your area, so for me, it would be Lincolnshire, it would cost £25 a month. And that will give me all the tenders that come in for Supply to Gov for that particular month. And if I match those with companies that I work with, it's very easy to introduce them to a new market of how to apply for tenders. So that's something that I would recommend you all have a look at, Supply to Gov. And the Supply to is the number 2 if you want to look at the website. But that's very helpful. There are various different names throughout the international market. And as quite a lot of you know, I'm working with the R&R group in the USA, currently as their vice president, and I'm in charge of their tendering process. And in the States, they use a system called Bid Sync, and there are some very, very meaty contracts that come up there. So the website for the UK is Supply to Gov. Now, if you wanted to help clients with exporting, there's also another thing that you can use, and that's the British embassies in various countries. Most of the embassies have commercial sections, and I noticed that there's one person on the call that attended a trade mission with me in Croatia when we were looking at the nationalisation of life insurance companies over there, and we had a really interesting few days looking at what was happening. But generally, those markets work in agricultural, power, water, microfinance as sections, and they're very easy to put together. So I've been mission leader on a number of these missions, and you make some really brilliant contacts from people with bigger companies that go out to do those things. Now, once you're involved with those companies, there are also other opportunities that develop from that. They're going to have their own wealth management, they're going to have their own pensions, they're going to have their own investments, and these are all really easy to pick up once you're involved in the company. So just from doing something simple as a liability audit, you know, it's a fact find by any other name really, and it brings all of this stuff together. It opens up lots of interesting opportunities for you and allow you to break into areas that you probably never thought you would be able to do. So this is another example of a liability audit, and I've called this one an honest analysis of my current financial plan. So there are a number of questions here that you can use in any kind of market, and it's just a simple matter of saying to a client, look, you've just got to answer yes or no to these, and you could do these on a seminar, you could do them on an email, you could do them however you wanted, and it's just getting them to answer yes or no. And I think a lot of financial advisors could go through these questions and not be able to answer yes to all of them. So I challenge you to go through it yourself, look at what the questions are and see what kind of stuff you can put in place. So I hope some of the things that I've said has helped and give people one or two ideas. I'm quite happy for all my material to be shared with everybody, Sarah. So if anybody wants to have copies of that, you know, I'm more than happy. So I hope that gives everybody some information, and thanks for listening to me. So back to you, Ed.